All right, we are live, I believe. All right, so I'll just go ahead and start drawing. Welcome to the class that's on abstract backgrounds. This has been the class. Thank you very much for observing. But anyways, yes, thank you. Thanks to everyone who's been tuning in all day. Unfortunately, we are running into some technical difficulties right now, but that's okay. We're gonna keep it going as long as we can. So what I'm about to do is do a quick demonstration on how I do abstract backgrounds and what kind of process I go through. So normally what I do is I start with pens and chalk, something that I can just easily spread at the beginning. I think the most important thing about the whole thing is just not being connected to basically anything that you're putting down at first. So basically, I just try to fill up as much space as I can, pretty much as fast as I can. Because the whole idea being that I am kind of more so just kind of warming up in a technical sense. I'm just trying to get all over. And so I'm just using a bunch of different chalk pastels right now. And another option is always to use Sharpies or markers. I'm using a canvas right now. But Sharpies and markers, one big thing about that is just you have to basically use that first, because if you try to go over chalk with these, you'll basically ruin them. It's kind of obvious, but one good thing about Sharpies though is that you have to put them basically on the first layer unless you put some kind of acrylic or some other coating on top of the chalk. But it also really bleeds through a lot of different layers. So I'm just going to keep adding layers and layers to where it basically goes into an infinite void. And I'll show you guys what I'm talking about in just a second, but I'm gonna go ahead and just add a little bit more to this. So I'm gonna add like one more color and then start going into the next process, which is basically gonna be adding water or basically watered down acrylic. And the water kind of interacts with this chalk and also the acrylic in a way that kind of allows for all of this to kind of blend in. And once again, this is all really just like warming up. I'm not thinking of a final form or composition or really anything right now. I'm going off of more so just like intuition and experimentation. Just seeing what I like, what different colors and different kinds of gestures I kind of like feel like doing almost. This is just a chance to experiment, and honestly kind of just meditate. That's a more meditative process to me, where I can just kind of spread things out and not really think about it as much as just experience it, I guess, as it's happening. So normally I use brushes. And honestly, I'm pretty partial towards one specific kind of brush, which is just like a round tip, like simple round tip, mostly because they're the most well-rounded. Oh man, terrible, just terrible. But yeah, I don't know. I just really like they're pretty durable. I started off using like a lot of big, wide, like flatter tips, especially for this kind of process. But I just like the control that you get, even in times when you're really not necessarily trying to get too much control, but at the same time you get to kind of preserve kind of gestural marks and fill up large areas in basically no time. And once again, I'm really not thinking too much about what I should put where as much as what do I want to put now. I'm not really thinking too much in terms of the future of the way these forms are going to interact with each other later. And the main reason why I guess I do that is just so that I can build these layers and kind of preserve, in a sense. I mean, as the process goes on, I'm always gonna like see things that, or you're always gonna see things that you like and want to choose to preserve. But for the most part, I think, especially in the first like 2 or 3 layers of an abstract ground, you really want to just go at it with no hesitations. Okay, so the acrylic that I'm using is really just like some leftover house paint right now. And that I tend to use like cheaper paints that have a lot and also are not really good at mixing too much, because when you start trying to mix like acrylic, latex and house paint and all these other things that come in huge quantities and like have really awesome colors, a lot of those really kind of gray out when you try to start mixing. So I'll like use these straight out the can for these first few layers for sure. But once I start going into like maybe the 15th to 20th layers, I guess that's really when it's pretty much all like golden acrylic, or just I guess just a little more higher and like definitely more expensive. But to me, latex paint and house paint, as long as it's not in some kind of fossilized condition, is kind of fair game. Another thing that I really like to do whenever I'm adding this kind of paint is to play with the thickness that you can apply it at and the kinds of rougher details that come from a little bit of paint just building up on the sides of the strokes. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and one thing about this, and that's a reason why I use acrylic over oils, is just because I don't want to wait for the layers to necessarily like yeah, I just don't want to wait for the layers to dry, or not wait a huge amount of time. I do appreciate the fact that you can go back in and mix paint, like colors and tones to get it just right over like a day's worth of time, or weeks even sometimes. But yeah, anyways, I just like acrylic because it dries super fast. So I'm gonna put this on the side and grab another one that I set up pretty much with the exact, pretty similar process, I guess. I did leave out the pastels in this one, but you can see that like you have to go through a good bit of layers with acrylic on top for that Sharpie to really disappear, and you can kind of play with that transparency all right there. So basically what I'm gonna do, I mean, every single time is different. What I'm kind of choosing to do right now is put just a little bit of pastel. And do they have a water jar?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. But yeah, so once I get into this point, I am kind of highlighting some forms that I see, but I'm still not in the process of really like connecting with specific forms. I'm really just, oh, thanks. And I'm gonna add one more color to this just so that it can really start spreading and mixing around. All right, and so another thing that I like to do that's just kind of, I guess, like a trick of mine is I rarely ever, like, if there's still a little bit of paint on this brush, I don't really keep like a paper towel or anything like that, like next to it to wipe it off. Instead, I'll keep like a small piece of canvas or extra piece of canvas or like some little small thing that I can use as kind of like a extension of a palette, or maybe go back and just add it to different parts, just to add that kind of element of chance that I still want to have a little bit of. I don't want to get too connected to any kind of forms that I put down. So, but another reason why I do that is just because like I like to save that as a piece in itself, because you get these really, really awesome. I'll show you guys one later. Just like palettes just look really cool, I guess, paint palettes. But anyway, so what I'll do is go in and just play around, because the water. Now after this, I'm going to have to use some kind of fixative, depending on how much chalk pastel is just out in the open and not fixed with anything. So right now, I'm not really fixing it with anything. I'm fixing it with water, which is not gonna make it stay like over a long, long period of time. But at the same time, it's a little bit, it's gonna stick a little bit better than like the more chalkier areas. But regardless, I'm still gonna be coming over this with more and more paint layers. So it's at this time where I'm thinking about, I guess, more so the broader composition, more so than anything. I'm still not thinking of shapes or forms. And what I mean by that is like, later on, I plan to fully develop this into some kind of objective picture. It's going to be something that's, you know, at least recognizable, not just complete abstract expression, which is great. But I'm more so, or what I'm trying to show is more so of a way of doing that abstract expression as a means of beginning the ground and then just working your way up from there. And I guess this is like kind of a perfect time now that I've kind of filled up this whole canvas with some wet acrylic. Take a little break from that for a second. And not all of that is going to dry, but you'll be surprised how fast these things, like these latex paints, kind of dry, especially when you start spreading them out. So I have these paintings. And that light right there. So I brought these paintings out just to kind of show not only what I'm working on, but just where I get to after multiple layers like this. So earlier I was mentioning using like an extra canvas or something laying around to kind of just throw extra paint on that you may have, or just to use it as a palette in general. And so what I did was, these are two separate ones that I did something like that with, and I added more collage to this. But anyways, this is just, this one right here is just a paint palette that was made out of like a small canvas that I had laying around. So I'm thinking of this as like a good ground to be starting with. And the thing that I really like about palettes is that you get all these colors that you never would have put together if you were planning that composition. These are just multiple times when you get all these mixed colors that you never really put together. But anyways, so that's that. That's gonna be something I'm working on pretty soon. But anyways, so this is kind of like what the next maybe like 3 or 4 layers, right, after something like this. So basically, once you start putting down bigger shapes, taking up more parts of the composition, then you start figuring out, or at least I start figuring out, what forms I can start making out of these kinds of collisions, these abstract collisions. So no part figures, or like, you know, they have kind of a semblance of a figure right here, kind of right here, and then these images. But this still has a lot of layers to go because I'm still in that middle stage of having these objective figures, and just sort of like highlighting that and still trying to figure out where I could add more figures, more detail on top of these. And so, oh yeah, I guess real quick, another thing about this, when you look closer, is so all of these like layers just comes from that experimental stage of not necessarily knowing what's going to happen and not even having like a true plan, as much as just, you know, you'll just feeling around for what strikes you as what's right in that situation. But regardless, if you start looking through the cracks of these kinds of areas, you see, so it goes way further. It's just the layers have a tendency to make your eye go further. And I guess my goal recently has been to try to make that go into a kind of infinity. And so this one, So yeah, so this one is, I just wanted to show this. This one started off as complete abstract colors and shapes, and yeah, I just kept building and building shapes, and then going on top of them, and figuring out bigger shapes that could be made from filling in areas. Um, but so yeah, let's see how we're doing in time. All right. So I'm gonna quickly do a few other things to this one. And so once again, I'm gonna take out this chalk. And something that I really like about like using the chalk on wet paint is you can have these negative spaces of gestural markings. And they end up looking kind of like scrawls, I guess. And then whenever I notice that I'm going with similar figures like this, these kind of remind me of trees or like columns for a porch maybe or something like that. But whenever I start noticing that I'm kind of doing something like that, whenever it's still this early in the stage, I'll kind of just figure out a way to kind of X that out and build a different form. Because the bottom line is I really just don't, I want to keep building this in an organic way that does not really stick too close to early ideas as far as where the composition could go. And I want to kind of create these moments where it seems like the composition is almost creating itself, and I'm just following what is linking up with each other. All right. All right. So basically, I'll get to a moment like this or like this. Uh, really, either way. But I'll get to a moment like this where I'll sit back away from it. And then whenever mainly for the thicker layers to dry, but also just to kind of sit with this kind of basic composition as far as the ways that the colors and shapes are um, in relationship to each other. But yeah, so I'll sit with this for a little while and then probably do another layer where I'm once again trying to erase forms that I'm gathering from this. Um, maybe do that a couple more times, but see forms like these areas that kind of look like trees. They kind of still look like trees, just kind of in the background of something else. Um, but I'm not necessarily saying that because I'm connected to them being trees, but um, as as it progresses, it's just gonna I'm just gonna keep going. Inspire, yeah, basically just inspire new forms, and let the composition take hold. So cool. Well, I hope that this was informative or in the least bit somewhat entertaining to you. Um, but yeah, my name is Ben Guidry. And well, I guess you can find me on Instagram as awkward underscore glances. Um, but more importantly, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming through and just like sticking with us. We still have a few more people on the lineup for today due to multiple technical issues. We've had to postpone, but we'll be continuing to post things through willingly in digital forms after today. That's not going to go away. This is more of an introduction of what we have going on. And so, yeah, I just like to take this time to thank all of you guys for tuning in. Thank all the artists who've both performed, who will be performing, and just for all the time that's been spent on this project. It's been great, but don't go anywhere because we have a couple more coming. We have a couple more coming your way. Real quick, we'd like to get people to tag us, like post. You can post the flyers. You can post an art piece that's inspired you or anything like that. We'd like for you to do that and put a hashtag remotely rejected for a chance to win some merch. We're still going to do that. Okay. So yeah, so you still have a chance to win free merch. Thank y'all, and we'll be in communication soon.